Hello everyone, this is the demo for the emphasis assignment where we are going to try creating focal points. In the last assignment, you created unity by arranging boxes. This time around, you're going to do the same concept, only instead of boring boxes, you're going to actually use letter forms. This adds complexity, adds a little bit more fun and playfulness to the assignment. Um, the tools are similar to what you used before, but this time we're going to use the type tool. So the type tool hangs out over here. It's the big capital T in your toolbox. If you click and hold down, you'll see that there's a bunch of items or tools in that drawer. The only one we want to work with is the horizontal type tool. And there are two ways to create type in Photoshop with this tool. The way we want to work is with point text. So if you just do a single pick, you can create text and type stuff. That works wonderfully well. When we switch to a move tool, we can move this around and it acts as a graphic. The other way we can work with this is if you click and drag, you'll see that we get a box. And as we type, things will fit within the box. But if you type outside of the box, it disappears. And if we change the size of the box, everything disappears. That can be kind of a nightmare when you're trying to do this assignment. So if you do a click and drag, that will cause problems. If you like what you typed and don't want to just delete it, over here in our layers, you can right click on the layer name, go down, and there's an option to convert to point text. It's going to give you a warning that's okay. Now this will behave as point text. Or if you don't want to worry about that and just want to retype, you can always just delete that layer by clicking down to the trash can and make a new layer. With the type tool, we have some options along the top bar. We can pick a font. Let me move this over so you can see. When we pick type, we can change the font and you can just hover over and see whatever fonts you have installed. This is nice. For this assignment, you are trying to get past the letters as letters. We're not typing words, we're just looking at these as interesting shapes. So a lowercase t is really kind of a long vertical and a shorter horizontal, right? Some have curves, some are just simple and bold, right? We're looking at thicks and thins, curvy versus not curvy. I just saw one that I thought was kind of cool. Right, Dottie's chocolate, which is one that I've installed. I know you guys aren't going to have, but it's still kind of a cool looking font, right? So this has got some neat curves and marks. It feels almost like it's sketched or drawn versus a more rigid mechanical looking letter. We also have the ability to play with the font weight, and some of these will be thinner, some of them will be thicker, and so that affects sort of the stroke or the mark you're making. We can play with the size here if we want to, and you can type in a number, or if you hover over the little lowercase or small t, big T, you'll see that your cursor turns into a little hand with some arrows. If you click down and hold with the left mouse, you can drag to the left to make it smaller, drag to the right to make it bigger. Pretty fun to play with. The other thing we can do over here is this big black box right here allows us to choose a color. So we can pick a light color or a darker color. This assignment is set up as a grayscale image, so it doesn't matter what color you pick, you're always going to just get a grayscale. But we can play with lights and darks. I'm going to stick with this for right now. So we can move it as you did with your boxes in Unity. We have a lot more options though. This is a graphic. If you go under Edit, Free Transform, or Control T, that's one of those ones that you use a lot in Photoshop. Control T allows us with a free transform. If you hover inside it, this little bounding box, you can move the letter or shape. If you go to an edge or a corner and you're right on the line, you're going to see that your cursor turns into a double arrow. That allows us to stretch, and if you hold down the Shift key, it allows you to stretch independent. So we can make this nice and long, or if we want, we could go the other way and make it nice and short, right? And then that creates some differences into what the shape looks like. We also then, if we move outside of the box, you'll see that our cursor turns into a curved double arrow, and that allows us to rotate. So with the same tool, it's pretty cool. We can scale, we can rotate, and we can move our object, which is pretty fun. So I'm going to play with something like, I don't know, I'm not going to rotate it. I'm just going to leave it as is. So that's one object. If we want to have multiple, we can take that same layer, we can click and drag down to the little plus sign. If you have an older version of Photoshop, it looks like it's got a little corner peeled like a post-it note, like you're peeling another layer. The updated interface has a little plus in a box. Click that, you now have a copy. So with the Move tool, we now have two of these. A quicker way of doing that is with the Move tool selected, if you hold down the Alt key, you'll see that your cursor turns into a little black and white arrows, and you can click and drag and just very quickly make as many of these as you want, which is really pretty cool. Now the assignment is to figure out how to create emphasis. How do you create a focal point, right? And from your readings, the idea of a focal point is you're making one object stick out and become more obvious, have greater visual weight than any of the other objects, right? We can do that in a lot of ways, but it basically boils down to the concept of contrast, right? You set up a pattern and you break it somehow. You make one object different. It could be in size, it could be in color, it could be in position, right? So I could set all these up kind of roughly in a line, right? But then I take one and move him down, right? He's now a little bit different, right? But if I want to really emphasize him, maybe, make sure I'm on the right one, I can free transform him. Now he's smaller, right? Right, he's separate from the others, isolation. So he's now breaking that. We're creating kind of this void where he's supposed to be. We can always rotate him, flip him upside down, right? We could take him and change the color. Maybe he's now a bunch of things, right? So to make him stand out, he is now um, breaking the pattern by being smaller, a different position, a different rotation, different color. All of that can add up together. So that's the trick, is to find something that's visually interesting that allows you to do those sorts of games. Um, Again, think composition as well. We are trying to fill the box, right? We're going to use the picture plane, and we want to somehow create something that's interesting, that plays with the relationship of the elements within the scene as well as the edges of the picture plane, right? The boundary, that compositional space. So what happens there? We can move letters around, maybe. I'm thinking about positioning, right? Because these letters are kind of cool. Um, just as shapes, right? And I can play with how those shapes start connecting, and this empty space in between starts becoming just as important as the black space, right? Um, you know what? Now I'm looking at this. This might be kind of fun. I'm going to free transform this one. When we have our move, scale, and rotate, we can also right click, and we have some other things we can do. I'm going to flip this one horizontally, and now I can start playing with something like this. Use my arrow keys to nudge my position. I don't know why. That's starting to me look like a little like face, like sunglasses, something, maybe. I don't know, right? Maybe a different letter, maybe no, I don't like that. Maybe an O, because that starts becoming a round shape, right? So now it's kind of starting to look like a monkey, right? So you got a little mouth, he's singing, right? I could start playing with something there. And once you start getting a shape that you like, that's made up of multiple elements, we can do, make sure I got the right ones. Okay, I can take all of these that are grouped, or all of these that I want. I can pick them all by picking shift at one end, or clicking one, holding down shift, and picking all of them. Or if they're not in specific order, I can hold down control key and individually pick pieces. And I can create a group, which is this little manila folder. By picking the group, I now have this as one object that I can move around. Before I get too far, here's one more thing with this. With the move tool, you always have this auto select. This can be wonderful or drive you nuts. So when you're working, be aware of this. Auto select layer will let me pick in whatever layer I'm working on, which is cool. I don't have to worry about making sure I'm selected to whichever layer. But if that's not what you want to happen, it can be a nightmare. You can also auto select the group. And since I have all of these in a group, I can grab the group and move it around. That works. Or if I just turn auto select off, then I have to make sure I'm where I need to be on my layers. All right, so I can play with this. Actually, starting to, for some reason, to me, look like a kind of an angry, the start of an angry deer, right? Reindeer. Like he's got mad because he didn't get to go take Santa on his trip. So maybe I want to put in some horns and things like that. But anyways, this design is here. It's taking up a lot of the space. I'm fitting within the box. Maybe I shrink it down, and now that is a very different design. And it's kind of boring dropping it in the middle, right? Dropped in the center usually is sort of where you start, but then start thinking about where this fits, right? So maybe up here tells a very different story than what is happening down here, right? Becoming aware of what's happening around the space. This gives me some room maybe to draw some antlers, or whatever this thing is. Maybe it doesn't have to be anything at all. It doesn't have to be an illustration at all. Maybe I want a few of them, right? And I'm going to pick both groups, shrink those down. And maybe, yeah, maybe I've got a few of these. Maybe there's a few of them. I'm setting up some sort of pattern here. Oops, hold down the Alt key. Right, and now there's, oh, so now I've got a pattern of all of these, and I can start thinking about where, auto select group, so I can just move these around. Where do these go? Where do they sit? Right? How do I set up some sort of system? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the space around them? And now I'm starting to create kind of these interesting voids in here. So maybe I want some other element that I don't even know what it's going to be, right? That's the joy of this assignment. You can just play. I don't know. I'm going to go in X because an X will be different than what I've got there. Oops, I didn't want that X in the group, so I can just click and drag him out of the group. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot. I still had this one. Where'd that one go that I had? There you go. Let's just move this guy. Right? He's now becoming something different, right? This is not really a great design by any means. I don't think it's all that beautiful. And I don't know if I like those shapes, but technically it's functional, right? We have created some sort of system. We have something breaking the system. This guy becomes something different, so he becomes the focal point. You can do this sort of thing with a lot of stuff. I'm going to take all of those and group those up. And so that's all one group. Right? So I have that group. And let's say I like it. And I can click on the little lock, padlock, which locks the group. I cannot move that around. It's just there, stuck to the background. I can see it, but it's not there. So maybe I want to play with something else. I've had students do this before. That's actually a lot of fun. Let's take radial, right? So maybe I find a nice. All right, so some other ways you can play. Look at the marks of the shapes themselves, right? The font that I chose here is very thick and very bold. Not necessarily bad, but maybe I want to try another way. So I'm going to try font here. do this. So I got a black font. I'm using a font called Bradley Hand. It's cool. It looks like a nice sort of sketchy shape, right? That's a neat squiggle, curvy line. And I've had students do this kind of stuff before. That's a lot of fun. I'm gonna make it tall and skinny, and then I can make a copy, Alt drag, and then rotate, Control T. I can rotate this, start playing with positioning, and then repeat, right? Once I get a few of these, I can take those, group them, make a copy of the group. So I'm dragging it down to the little plus sign, rotate that group. I'm starting to create kind of this cool spiral sunburst sort of shape. Take the two of those. I can group those together, free transform them. Oh, apparently I hit the wrong key. Group them, free transform them. Right, so I'm starting to create this cool sunburst shape. We have this radial pattern. And the cool thing with radial is that you already have sort of a built-in focal point, right? All of these are almost literally pointing to the center, right? That's where everything explodes out of or condenses down to. So I have the ability to build in very easy focal point sort of location there. And this is starting to work. Maybe I move this up a little bit. Turn off focus. Okay, and maybe I'm create a little bit of an empty space right there. Because then, since I have that as a place to put something, maybe I can just create period, right? So we're working with letter shapes and number shapes. Think of the things that you can create on your keyboard. So letters, numbers, and punctuation. Those are all sort of the pieces you want to use. Stay away from using wingdings or any of those cool kind of Asian fonts because those are already abstracted. You don't really see them as shapes as much. Part of this assignment is learning to look past the recognizable shapes and turn them into something. Um, but that being said, we have some great sort of pre-built marks that you already have built in. Um, Period works great, right, for a dot. A comma is some sort of dot and curve sort of thing. We have O's is a dot that has a hole in the middle, right? Depending on the font, an L or a T could be lines and crosses. X's is a cross. Lots of sort of ones that you can use. As say pieces and parts to build something up. So I like the idea of just doing a simple dot and we can make that bigger and that could become something that goes right here in the center. Or maybe I just make it a little bit smaller. Right? All those things are literally pointing to that dot. Right? So that kind of becomes a focal point in and of itself. But then we look at how does that entire piece fit within the whole, right? Does it fit down here? Um, the composition is starting to look a little bit more whole, just like this, right? That empty space around here isn't really empty. That is helping contain and hold all these other elements. So all of this space here, even though it's just white and just sort of plain, it's still part of the design, right? So you look at how your element can fit within that space and make the empty space just as important as the full space. We call it positive space and negative space. Um, that almost starts feeling like it could be complete, right? There's a little thing in the middle that becomes the focal point. If we really want to emphasize that, we could play with maybe a different color. I know I'm doing the same thing that I did on this one, but it's same yet different, right? We could play with this entire group and make a bunch of these and have one small and a bunch big, or a bunch small and one big. Lots of possibilities. Okay, one more thing that I want to show you guys, to get you guys thinking about. Right now, the white paper is kind of boring. It works, but white paper, you're used to playing with a pencil or a marker and doodling on white paper. And that works, but you're not tied to that. You could also do something like use this shape tool here, the rectangle tool, with a fill. I'm gonna just draw a box, and I now have a black background. I can play with the color here, and maybe I go with a gray, and that adds something. Um, and then instead of creating text that is, let's go with a, I don't know, we'll go with a circle. And I can do black, but issue you're going to run into when you start moving that on top, black on black, can't see it. Right? So if we double click, we can change our color to white. And now you have a white shape on a black background. Layer stacking makes a world of difference. So if your rectangle is above the shape, you're not going to see it because the shape is opaque. So we can click and drag that underneath. So we have our shape here. Now, oops, wrong layer. I can drag this out, and I now have two of them starting to look almost like it could be a face, or it could just be an interesting arrangement of circles. And that starts setting up a pattern. I don't know what it is or where it's going, but then maybe there's something over here. This one is now isolated from the rest, and if I want to make it very different, we pick a very different shape. So if I'm doing that, maybe I have more of these and they can overlap. Why not? Right? You can build up this entire system, and there's going to be something different, and we make that something different as we can to make it stand out, whether it's in position, whether it's color. Um, yes, hopefully you guys get where I'm going with that now. So we are creating one thing that sticks out from the rest. And I think that's probably enough to get you started on this assignment. As always, if you have questions, please ask. You have an embedded tutor that will be able to help you as well with Photoshop stuff or design concepts. Always can send an email or whatever you need to get some feedback on it or ask questions as you go along. All right, thank you and happy clicking.